The hologram flickered to life on my kitchen table, casting blue shadows across the peeling wallpaper of my studio apartment. A being of impossible proportions materialized before me, 12 feet tall, muscles like tectonic plates shifting beneath, steel gray skin, 4 arms crossed in what I could only assume was authority. 6 eyes, arranged in 2 rows, studied me with the intensity of a predator evaluating prey. Marcus Rivera. The voice resonated through harmonics that made my teeth ache. You have been selected for custodial service at the Zephyrian Military Academy. Transport departs in 4 hours. I nearly choked on my instant ramen. 3 months unemployed, living on unemployment benefits and the occasional odd job. And now this? The last thing I'd expected was a job offer from beings who looked like they could bench press a city bus. There's gotta be some mistake, I stammered. But the hologram was already dissolving into sparks of light. The portal that arrived outside my apartment. Building defied every law of physics I'd learned in community college. A shimmering oval of energy that hummed with power, surrounded by floating metallic rings that rotated with mathematical precision. The few neighbors brave enough to peek through their windows quickly retreated when they saw the massive figure waiting beside it. You are Marcus Rivera? The escort was even larger than the hologram, 15 feet of crystalline armor over what appeared to be living stone. When he spoke, streetlights flickered. Yeah, that's me. I shouldered my duffel bag, suddenly aware of how pathetic my possessions looked. But I think you've got the wrong guy. I'm just a janitor. Precisely. The being gestured toward the portal with one arm that could have doubled as a construction crane. Your species possesses certain ... qualities we require. Before I could ask what qualities, the portal's energy field enveloped me. Reality twisted, colors bled into sounds, and I felt my consciousness scattered across dimensions before snapping back together like a rubber band. Woke up retching on a floor that felt like warm metal dot. The first thing that hit me wasn't the sight, it was the sound. A constant, bone-deep thrumming that seemed to come from the very structure around me. The second thing was the smell. Ozone, heated metal, and something organic that reminded me of a gym after a marathon session. I stood in what could only be described as a cathedral of war. The ceiling soared 200 feet above me, supported by pillars that would have dwarfed redwoods. Holographic displays flickered along the walls, showing tactical formations and combat scenarios. The air itself shimmered with energy fields, and I could feel the static electricity making my hair stand on end. Impressive, isn't it? The voice came from above. I looked up to see a being descending what appeared to be a floating platform. She was smaller than the others, only about 9 feet tall, with skin that shifted between silver and gold like liquid metal. 2 arms instead of 4, but each one was corded with muscles that spoke of devastating power. Her face was almost humanoid, if you ignored the fact that her eyes glowed with internal light. I'm Verithane, she said, stepping off the platform with fluid grace. Combat instructor, and your orientation officer, Marcus. I extended my hand, then immediately felt stupid. Her hand could have crushed mine to powder, but she shook it with surprising gentleness. Walk with me, she said, her accent giving every word a melodic quality. There's much to understand about your new home. We passed through corridors wide enough for semi-trucks, each one lined with viewports showing the Academy's true scale. The structure was massive, a city-sized fortress, floating in the void between 3 binary stars. Training grounds stretched for miles in every direction, filled with beings that defied description. Some looked like the crystalline creature that had escorted me. Others were more organic, and a few seemed to be made of pure energy held in roughly humanoid form. How many species are represented here? I asked, trying to process the impossibility of it all. 47, Verithane replied, all part of the Galactic Defense Coalition. All here to prepare for what's coming. What's coming? She stopped walking and turned to face me. For a moment, her glowing eyes dimmed, and I caught a glimpse of something that might have been fear. The Devourers, she said quietly. They've already consumed 17 star systems. We estimate we have perhaps 6 months before they reach this sector. The weight of that statement hit me like a physical blow. And you want me to clean up after your training sessions, Marcus? She placed a hand on my shoulder, and I felt warmth radiating through her skin. Every warrior here could level a city block, but none of us can see the small details that matter. None of us can maintain the precision required for the technology that keeps this place running. That's why we need you. My first week at the academy was a crash course in humility. I'd thought I understood what big meant. I'd cleaned office, buildings, shopping malls, even a stadium once. But nothing had prepared me for the scale of the Zephyrian facility. That the training grounds alone covered 40 square miles. Anti-gravity chambers where beings practiced three-dimensional combat, leaving scorch marks on walls that were 50 feet thick. Sparring arenas where the impact of fists meeting created shockwaves that cracked reinforced steel. And the weapons range, good God, the weapons range. Energy beams that could vaporize mountains, projectiles that moved at significant fractions of light speed, and explosive yields that made nuclear weapons look like firecrackers. My job was to keep it all functional, clean the targeting systems when they got clogged with debris, scrub the training mats when they became too slippery with various alien bodily fluids, replace the atmospheric processors when they overloaded from the sheer amount of energy being thrown around. It was during one of these maintenance runs that I first encountered Korthek. I was elbow deep in an air recycling unit, trying to remove what I'd been told were metabolic crystals, but looked suspiciously like glowing kidney stones, when a shadow fell across my workspace. I looked up to see a being that made even the other Zephyrians look small, 18 feet tall, with skin like polished obsidian and 4 arms that looked like they could punch through starship hulls. His head was crowned with what appeared to be organic armor, and his eyes, all 6 of them, burned with an inner fire that made me want to look away. "You are the human," he said, his voice carrying harmonics that made my bones vibrate. "That's me," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. "Marcus Rivera, custodial engineer. I am Korthek, first blade of the Zephyrian War Council." He studied me with the intensity of someone examining a particularly interesting insect. "You maintain our weapons." "I maintain everything," I corrected. "Weapons, life support, waste, processing, atmospheric controls. Show me." It wasn't a request. For the next 3 hours, Korthek followed me through my rounds, asking questions about every system, every process, every piece of technology I touched. His questions were precise, insightful, and increasingly disturbing. "Why do you ask about redundancy systems?" I finally said as we stood in the Academy's main power core. "These things are built to last centuries." "Because," he said, his voice barely above a whisper, "we may not have centuries. We may not have months." He showed me to the observation deck, where the Academy's massive viewports displayed the star field beyond. At first, I saw nothing unusual, just the eternal dance of distant suns and the occasional patrol ship. Then Korthek activated a long-range sensor display. "There," he pointed to a sector of space that appeared empty. 12 hours ago, that was the Meridian system. 7 billion souls. I looked closer and saw nothing but void, not even debris, just ... emptiness, as if the stars themselves had been erased. "The Devourers don't just destroy," Korthek continued. "They consume. They take the very matter of worlds, of stars, of entire systems, and convert it to fuel for their advance. They leave nothing behind. How do you fight something like that?" "We don't know," he admitted. "That's why we're here. Every species in the Coalition has sent their best warriors, their most advanced weapons, their deepest secrets. We're trying to forge an army that can stand against the inevitable. And my job is to keep your toilets clean." For the first time, something that might have been humor flickered across his features. "Your job, Marcus Rivera, is to keep us fighting. Without you, our weapons fail. Our life support fails. Our hope fails." 3 months into my tenure, I'd settled into a routine that bordered on the surreal. Wake up at 05:00 ship time to the sounds of combat practice echoing through the hull. Breakfast in the mess hall, where I sat at a table designed for toddlers, while beings the size of houses discussed tactical formations. Then 8 hours of maintaining systems that could annihilate planets, followed by evening reports to commanders who could bench press battleships. It was during one of these evening briefings that I met Zara Neth. She entered the conference room. Like liquid mercury given form, her movements so fluid they seemed to defy physics. 8 feet tall, with skin that shifted between deep purple and silver depending on the light, and 2 arms that suggested both grace and devastating power. Her face was almost human, if you ignored the fact that her eyes held the depth of nebulae. "This is our new tactical coordinator," Verathane announced. "Zaraneth of the Void Dancers." "Void Dancers?" I couldn't help but ask. "We fight in the spaces between spaces," Zaraneth explained, her voice carrying an accent that seemed to shift and flow like music, where physics becomes ... flexible. Over the following weeks, I found myself spending more time with Zaraneth than with any of the other instructors. She had a curiosity about human culture that was both flattering and slightly unnerving. She wanted to know about Earth's oceans, about cities that existed in only 2 dimensions, about the concept of rain. "Your species fascinates me," she said. One evening, as we sat in the Academy's arboretum, a vast greenhouse filled with plants from dozens of worlds. "You're so fragile, yet you venture into space. You're so small, yet you think in terms of galaxies." "We're stubborn," I replied, watching her tend to a flowering vine that pulsed with bioluminescent patterns. "It's probably our most defining characteristic, stubbornness," she mused. "We have 47 species in the Coalition, and each brings something unique. The Zephyrians bring strength. The Crystalline bring precision. The Void Dancers bring adaptability. What do humans bring?" I thought about it for a long moment. Probably the ability to keep going when any rational being would give up. She turned to look at me, and I caught something in her expression that made my chest tighten. That may be exactly what we need. It was around this time that I began to notice the small things. Weapons that were supposed to be maintenance-free, requiring constant adjustment. Life support systems that should have run for decades, showing signs of premature wear. Emergency protocols being updated with increasing frequency. When I brought these concerns to Korthek, his response was a single word: sabotage. "Sabotage?" I repeated. "Who would sabotage the Academy?" "Someone who doesn't want us to succeed," he said grimly. "Someone who would rather see the Coalition fall than stand united against the Devourers." "But that's insane. If the Devourers win, the universe dies," Korthik finished. "But some beings would rather rule over ashes than serve under anyone else's banner." The first real attack came during what should have been a routine training exercise. I was in the lower levels, performing maintenance on the Academy's gravitational stabilizers, when the entire structure shuddered like a struck bell. Emergency lights bathed everything in red, and the intercom crackled to life with voices speaking in languages I didn't recognize, but tones I understood perfectly. Panic, rage, and desperation. I made my way to the command center, where chaos reigned. Holographic displays showed the Academy's exterior, where shapes moved in the void, not ships exactly, but something far worse. They flowed like liquid darkness, absorbing light and energy, leaving trails of absolute nothing in their wake. "Devourer scouts," Verathane explained. Her usual composure cracked. "They found us." The battle that followed was unlike anything I'd ever imagined. The Coalition forces threw everything they had at the attackers' weapons that could crack. Moons, energy beams that burned like captured stars, defensive fields that twisted space itself. For every scout they destroyed, 2 more seemed to take its place. But it was Zaraneth who turned the tide. She and her Void Dancers phased out of normal space, appearing inside the enemy formations like ghosts made of starlight. They moved between dimensions, striking from angles that didn't exist. And for a moment, it seemed like we might actually win. Then the Academy's main power core exploded. The blast killed 47 beings instantly and left another 100 critically injured. Worse, it crippled our main defensive systems, leaving us vulnerable to the next wave of attacks in the aftermath. As I helped coordinate damage control, I discovered the truth. The explosion hadn't been caused by battle damage. It had been a deliberate overload, triggered by someone with intimate knowledge of the Academy's systems. The saboteur, I said to Korthik as we stood in the wreckage of the power core. There, here, on the Academy? His expression was grim. Not just here, Marcus. There's someone we trust. Someone with access to our most sensitive systems. Over the next several days, paranoia spread through the Academy like a virus. Friends turned on friends. Allies became suspects. The coalition that had seemed so united began to fracture under the weight of suspicion. It was Zaraneth who made the breakthrough. She came to me in my quarters, her usually fluid movements jerky with exhaustion and stress. I've been analyzing the attack patterns, she said, projecting a holographic display from her wrist communicator. The Devourers knew exactly where to strike. They bypassed our strongest defenses and hit our most vulnerable points. Inside information, I agreed. But that could be anyone on the command staff. No, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. It could only be someone with access to the maintenance logs. Someone who knew which systems were already compromised. The implications hit me like a physical blow. You think it's me? I think, she said carefully, that someone has been using your access codes to sabotage the Academy from within. Someone who wanted to make it look like the human was the traitor. The investigation that followed was as thorough as it was humiliating. Every system I'd touched, every repair I'd made, every report I'd filed, all of it was analyzed by beings with minds that could process information at speeds that made quantum. Computers looked sluggish. The evidence was damning. My access codes had been used to introduce subtle flaws into critical systems. My maintenance schedules had been altered to create windows of vulnerability. My repair logs had been doctored to hide the true extent of the damage. But there was one problem with the frame job. I was too small. The quantum locks on the primary systems require a specific biometric signature, Tharathane explained during one of the interrogation sessions. Bone density, muscle mass, neural electrical patterns. The saboteur had to be physically present to make the changes. And I asked, though I already knew where this was going, and you're too small to trigger the sensors. The locks wouldn't even acknowledge your presence. The real saboteur was someone large enough to register on the biometric scanners, but with access to my codes. Someone who had been watching me, learning my patterns, and using my trust to gain entry to restricted areas. The revelation came during a Coalition War Council meeting. I was there in my usual capacity, the token human, keeping the coffee flowing and the ashtrays empty, when Korthik made an announcement that changed everything. We've received word from the outer colonies, he said, his voice carrying the weight of worlds. The Devourers have consumed the Vega system. They're moving faster than our projections indicated. How much time do we have? Asked Admiral Vexron, a crystalline being whose body refracted light into rainbow patterns. 3 weeks, Korthik replied. Maybe less. That's when I saw a flicker of expression on Varathane's face that didn't match the gravity of the moment. Not fear, not determination, but something else. Something that looked almost like satisfaction. After the meeting, I followed her to her quarters, my mind racing with possibilities I didn't want to consider. She was my friend, my protector, the one being on the Academy who had treated me like more than a useful tool. I found her in her private study, surrounded by holographic displays showing star charts and fleet movements. But these weren't coalition formations. They were something else entirely. Marcus, she said without turning around, I was wondering when you'd figure it out. You're working with them, I said, my voice barely a whisper. The Devourers. She turned to face me, and for the first time, I saw her true nature. The warmth in her eyes was gone, replaced by something cold and calculating. Working with them? Oh, Marcus, I am them. The revelation hit me like a physical blow. You're a devourer. I'm what the devourers were, before they became what they are now, she corrected. My people were consumed 300 years ago, but some of us survived, changed, adapted. We became something new, something that could infiltrate, manipulate, and ultimately destroy from within. Why? I asked, though I already knew the answer would break my heart. Because the coalition is a lie, she said, her voice carrying a sadness that seemed genuine. 47 species, all supposedly working together, but really just using each other. The Zephyrians want to rule through strength. The Crystalline want to impose their perfect order. The Void Dancers want to remake reality in their image. There's no unity here, Marcus. There's only ambition, wearing the mask of cooperation. So, you decided to destroy it all. I decided to make it honest, she corrected. The Devourers don't lie about what they are. They don't pretend to be saving the universe, while secretly planning to dominate it. They simply are what they are: entropy. Given form, the universe's way of cleaning house. I looked at the star charts surrounding us, at the fleet movements that showed Devourer forces positioned for a final assault. How long have you been planning this? Since the day I arrived, she admitted. I was supposed to sabotage the Academy, subtly, let it fall naturally when the Devourers attacked. But then I met you. Me? You changed everything, Marcus. You showed me what cooperation actually looks like. Not the false unity of the coalition, but genuine care. You maintained systems not because you were ordered to, but because you understood that people depended on them. You helped beings who could have crushed you without a second thought, not because you expected reward, but because it was the right thing to do. And that changed your mind? No, she said sadly. It made me realize that what I was doing was right. You're the only honest being on this entire academy, Marcus. You're the only one who actually cares about preserving life instead of dominating it. And when the Devourers come, you'll be the only one they spare. The next 24 hours were the longest of my life. I had the power to save the Academy, to warn the Coalition about the impending attack, to expose Verathane's true nature. All it would take was a single transmission to the command center. But I also had the power to save her. I found myself in the Academy's Chapel A, multi-faith space designed to accommodate the spiritual needs of 47 different species. The architecture was impossible, with gravity fields that allowed beings to pray in any orientation, and lighting that shifted to match the religious preferences of whoever was present. Zaraneth found me there, sitting in a pew designed for beings 10 times my size. The command staff is looking for you, she said, her usual fluid grace replaced by visible tension. They want to debrief you about the security investigation. I know who the saboteur is, I said without looking at her. She sat beside me, her presence warm and reassuring. I know you do. The question is, what are you going to do about it? I don't know, I admitted. She's my friend, maybe the only real friend I've ever had. Even knowing what she is? Especially knowing what she is, I said. She had every reason to kill me, to eliminate the one person who might figure out her plan. But she didn't. She protected me, trained me, made me feel like I mattered. That has to count for something. Does it count for more than the lives of everyone on this academy? I looked at her, seeing the starlight reflected in her eyes. Would you sacrifice someone you love to save strangers? I don't know, she said, honestly. But I know that love without justice is just selfishness with a prettier name. That night, I made my decision, but it wasn't the one anyone expected. I went to Verathane's quarters at 0300 ship time, when the Academy's corridors were empty, except for the patrol drones. She was waiting for me, as I'd known she would be. You've made your choice, she said. It wasn't a question. Yes, I replied, but not the one you think. I sat across from her, the human-sized chair comically small in the vast room. You're wrong about the Coalition. Am I? She asked. Look around you, Marcus. 47 species, and they still can't agree on basic tactical doctrine. The Zephyrians want to meet the Devourers in direct combat. The Crystalline want to build defensive barriers. The Void Dancers want to hide in interdimensional space until the threat passes. They're scared, I said. Scared beings make bad decisions. That doesn't make them evil, doesn't it? Her eyes flashed with anger. The Zephyrians have conquered 17 systems in the name of protection. The crystalline have forcibly evolved 12 species to match their idea of perfection. The void dancers have erased entire timelines because they didn't like how they ended. And the Devourers have consumed millions of worlds, I countered. They've committed genocide on a scale that makes the Coalition's crimes look like parking tickets. The Devourers are honest about what they are, she said. They don't pretend to be saviors while enslaving entire worlds. Maybe, I said, but they're still wrong. And so are you. I stood up, knowing this would be the last time I saw her as a friend. I'm going to report you to the command staff. I'm going to tell them about the sabotage, about the planned attack, about everything, even though it will mean my death, especially because it will mean your death, I said. Because you're better than this, Vera. You taught me that every life has value, that every being deserves a chance to choose their own path. The Devourers want to take that choice away from everyone, and the Coalition wants to make that choice for everyone, she countered. Then we change the Coalition, I said. We make it better. We don't destroy it and let entropy win. The final battle began exactly as Verathane had predicted. The Devourer fleet emerged from hyperspace, like a plague of living darkness. There, ships flowing and shifting in patterns that hurt to look at directly. They moved with purpose, striking at the Academy's weak points with surgical precision. But this time, we were ready. The information I'd provided about the sabotage had allowed the Coalition engineers to strengthen the Academy's defenses. The tactical data I'd stolen from Verathane's quarters had given the command staff insight into Devourer strategy. Most importantly, the revelation that infiltrators could be among us had forced the Coalition species to actually trust each other, because distrust was exactly what the enemy wanted. The battle was epic in scope. Energy beams that could vaporize asteroids lanced through space. Gravitational weapons twisted reality into impossible shapes. Void dancers phased in and out of existence, striking from angles that didn't exist. Zephyrian warriors broadcast their battle cries across all frequencies, their voices carrying the weight of worlds. But it was the small things that made the difference. The maintenance systems I'd repaired held under impossible stress. The life support networks I'd optimized kept functioning even when the Academy's hull was breached in a dozen places. The communication arrays I'd fine-tuned allowed perfect coordination between species who had never fought together before. In the end, it came down to a single moment. The Devourer command ship, a thing of living darkness the size of a small moon, broke through the Academy's final defensive perimeter. Its weapons charged, preparing to deliver a blow that would crack the station like an egg. That's when Verathane made her choice. She appeared on the command center's main screen, her image transmitted from somewhere deep within the enemy fleet. Behind her, I could see the twisted geometry of a Devourer ship, all flowing surfaces and impossible angles. Marcus, she said, her voice carrying across the battle's chaos. You were right about everything. The transmission cut out, replaced by a blinding flash of light that turned the enemy command ship into a miniature sun. The explosion cascaded through the Devourer fleet, chain reactions turning their own weapons against them. When the light faded, the enemy fleet was gone. Not destroyed, consumed, the same way they had consumed so many worlds. Verathane had turned their own nature against them, using their hunger for energy to overload their systems. The Academy was saved. The Coalition was saved. But the victory felt hollow, knowing what it had cost. 3 months later, I stood in the Academy's rebuilt arboretum, tending to a small section of Earth plants that had been established in Verathane's memory. The irony wasn't lost on me using life to remember someone who had chosen death to preserve life. She would have liked this, Zaraneth said, appearing beside me with that fluid grace I'd come to love. She always said that humans had a gift for finding hope in impossible situations. She was right about a lot of things, I replied, carefully. Watering a small rose bush. The Coalition isn't perfect. Hell, It's barely functional most of the time, but it's what we have, and it's better than the alternative. The other species are learning, she said. The Zephyrians are teaching their strength-based tactics to the crystalline. The Void Dancers are sharing their dimensional technologies with the Zephyrians. For the first time in galactic history, we're actually cooperating instead of just coexisting. And it only took an invasion by universe-devouring monsters to make it happen, I said dryly. Progress is progress, she replied, with what I'd learned was her version of a smile. Besides, we have something now that we didn't have before. What's that? A janitor who actually cares about keeping things clean. I laughed, the sound echoing through the arboretum. Is that my official title now? Galactic Janitor? Marcus Rivera, she said, her voice taking on a formal tone. By unanimous vote of the Coalition Council, you've been appointed as the Academy's first Director of Integrated Systems Maintenance and Cultural Exchange. That's a hell of a title for someone who fixes toilets. You do more than fix toilets, she said seriously. You fixed us. You showed 47 species that cooperation isn't just possible, it's necessary. You proved that the smallest person can make the biggest difference. I looked around the arboretum, at the plants from dozens of worlds growing together in impossible harmony. In the distance, I could see the Academy's new construction expanded training facilities, improved defenses, and living quarters designed to accommodate the growing number of species joining the Coalition. So what happens now? I asked. Now, she said, we get back to work. The Devourers are still out there, and there are the threats we haven't even imagined yet. But we'll face them together, as one people instead of 47 separate species. And I'll be there to clean up the mess afterward. You'll be there to make sure there isn't a mess to clean up, she corrected, because that's what you do, Marcus Rivera. You see the problems before they become disasters, and you fix them before anyone else even notices they exist. As if summoned by her words, Korthek appeared at the Arboretum's entrance, his massive form somehow managing to move with surprising quiet. He nodded to both of us, then focused his 6 eyes on me. Director Rivera, he said, the title still sounding strange. In his harmonic voice, we have a situation developing in the Outer Rim. 3 new species have requested Coalition membership, but they're having integration difficulties. What kind of difficulties? I asked, already reaching for my tools. The kind that require someone who understands that the universe is held together by the small details, he replied. The kind that require a janitor. I looked at Zaraneth, who nodded encouragingly. Then I looked at Korthek, who despite his intimidating appearance, was waiting for my decision with something that might have been respect. Well, I said, shouldering my equipment bag, I guess I'd better get to work. As we walked toward the transport bay, I reflected on the strange path that had brought me here. A year ago, I'd been an unemployed janitor living in a studio apartment, convinced that my best days were behind me. Now I was the Director of Integrated Systems Maintenance for the most important military installation in the galaxy, tasked with holding together an alliance that might be the universe's last hope. The work was harder, the stakes were higher, and the commute was literally astronomical. But for the first time in my life, I felt like I was exactly where I belonged. After all, someone had to keep the universe clean, and apparently, that someone was me.